finding and utilizing typefaces from folks that are traditionally underrepresented is really important to me, because as we do that and focus on it more and more, we are literally giving more visibility to folks that traditionally aren't being seen, because literally these typefaces are being read by millions and billions of eyeballs every day. Give the traditionally marginalized and underrepresented type designers the first stab, like the first chance. And what that requires is putting the onus on the person who's selecting the typeface. It takes a lot of work to do that. The onus is really on spending the extra, I would say, double the time that you think would consider finding a typeface. If it takes you traditionally 10 or 20 hours to find a typeface, consider around 40 hours to go that extra length to find the fonts that feel good and feel right for the project. And I'm not saying you have to use a quote unquote diverse type just for the sake of it and don't care about how it looks and don't care about any of that. Like all of the story around who created it, the sense of craft and the feel and how well it jives with the rest of the branding, all that stuff has to be taken into account. So I would start with the identity of the designer first, and then move on to the more literally aesthetic decisions and go from there.
Welcome to Works in Process, the podcast that asks the hows and whys behind creative work. Take a ride with me, designer and educator George Garastegui, as I learn from my guests there's no one way to being a creative, but endless possibilities fueled by passion, determination, and of course, process. And that was today's guest, Ritesh Gupta. Ritesh is a Wieden+Kennedy alum, a former director of 2 Shark Tank companies, and specializes in product design, project management, branding, and growth analytics for emission-driven companies. He recently rebranded and rebuilt Realm, a podcast studio and app with Mother Design, Felt Not Heard, and an incredible internal team. It debuted number 1 on Apple's podcast charts and was featured in It's Nice That, as well as Print Mag. And brand new named it one of the top 10 word marks and monograms of 2021. And before that, Ritesh worked for and with Sagmeister Walsh, Cooper Hewitt, Disney, and Hungry Harvest. Currently, he's a senior director of new product ventures at Gannett USA Today. We'll get into some of that, but I want to focus on his support and championing of the shift in design to include more advocacy, accountability, and access. Ritesh has been helping change the landscape with his volunteer work at Where Are All the Black Designers, a nonprofit design advocacy organization, and with his upcoming venture as founder of Useful School, a useful, fun, affordable 10-week product design virtual program catered to the people who need it, ushering in more diversity, autonomy, and practicality into the profession. Ritesh, welcome to the Works in Process podcast, man.
Thanks. Happy to be here.
Yeah, thank you for carving out some time of your soon-to-be very, very busy schedule.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.
So I want to get into all your branding and design career, but first let's do a rapid-fire Q&A session. You ready?
You got it. Let's do it.
All right. So first is a series of this or that questions. Coffee or tea?
Tea.
Okay. Toast or a bagel?
Bagel. And specifically, it has to be a plain bagel, not toasted.
Ooh, plain, not toasted.
Yeah, I got to get a baseline. Whenever I go to New York City bagel spots, I have to understand the basics before I start putting on a bunch of accoutrement. You know what I mean?
Okay. I got you. Branding or product design?
Oh, come on now. They're basically the same thing. I'm gonna keep it a little. I'm gonna make it a little spicy. I'll say product design.
Volunteering or founding?
Oof, it's another difficult one. Because I'm really in the space right now, I would say founding.
Cool. RGB or CMYK?
RGB actually has given me a lot of problems in the past, especially when we try to convert it into the printing landscape. So I'll keep it also spicy. I'll say CMYK, but my first love is RGB.
Got it. 50-50, a little bit of both.
Yeah, a little bit of both. It depends on the situation.
Got it. Of course. And so now quick word association, right? So the first thing you hear when you think of these words. Creativity.
Necessary.
Determination.
For some reason, the first word was obvious.
Cool. Business.
As usual.
Failure.
Welcome.
Community.
Action.
Education.
Representation.
Mistakes.
welcomed,
skills,
soft,
history,
unlearn,
opportunity,
impact,
accessibility,
required,
future,
people of color,
and last but not least, process.
roller coaster.
Nice, nice. I like these both little things because they're kind of instinctual. There's not really a time to react. There's just time to answer. I know sometimes we want to make it perfect, but I think some of the things are just, it gets us loose before we gotta get into really what you're all about. And most of the time when I'm interviewing people, right, I don't really know you, and it's a way for us to kind of break the ice. So thank you for that, right? And so now I think I want to really get into a little bit of your origin story, and I want to learn about your introduction into art and design. Where did you grow up, and were you a creative or an artsy kid?
So I grew up in a town called Temecula, California, which for some reason is referenced a lot on SNL. I don't know why, but they always have references to Temecula. So it feels kind of good, but also reminds me of where I grew up. And I actually didn't really like where I grew up. There weren't a lot of kids that looked like me. I was like only one of a couple of brown kids, specifically Indian Americans, all through 12th grade. So it wasn't until UCLA where I actually saw a lot more folks that looked like me. I was a creative kid. I grew up playing a lot of music. I started out playing trumpet, but I used that as a pogo stick and I broke the bell, and my mom was super pissed. So then she said, all right, well, if you want to continue doing music, which I wanted to, you're going to have to find another instrument, and we're not going to pay for it. So the school luckily had an oboe, but everyone in my class was really annoyed by the sound I was making from it, because it's kind of an annoying sound, especially when you're first learning, and it gets only really beautiful when you become an expert. Then I moved on to bassoon, and the person that I had a crush on in middle school was not into that at all. And so I moved relatively quickly away from bassoon, and the jazz band was actually having auditions for bass guitar. So I switched over to bass, played that in jazz band. And then I found a really big love for drums. And I've played that up until this day. I was in the drum line, played competitively, doing competitions all over California. And I played tenor drums specifically, which are these kind of six drums. And they're about 30, 40 or so pounds that you wear in the front of you, but it's really, really hard on your back. But I fell in love with it. I got addicted to it, and continued playing drums through college, where I ended up becoming kind of a section leader, drumline captain at the UCLA marching band, played at all these football games. And I was able to be really creative. We were able to have fun with what we're playing, performing, all the emotions and everything. You really want to connect with the audience and look right in their eyes and really connect emotionally. So that was a lot of fun. When it came to creativity professionally, though, it was not actually something I ever considered. I mean, we like to joke in kind of the Indian Desi community that you only have like three paths of life, and it's pretty true for a lot of traditional Indian families. And the three paths are: number one, a doctor; number two, an engineer; and number three, a failure. And so for me to grow up in an environment where I was encouraged to do creativity, but it was more or less relegated to a volunteer activity or as almost like an afterthought, I never really actually considered doing and pursuing any sort of creative field until I realized that I can make money doing it and a good living, as well as knowing that I can make impact. So knowing something that I make that my parents would use or know exactly what I would make was really important to me. Not only for that validation, you always kind of want validation whenever possible, especially with parents within Indian families. You're always trying to please your parents and your family. So it was really kind of a long journey for me to realize that I was more suited for a creative role, specifically with visual and other sensory design. And that didn't happen until well into college. That didn't happen until I started in advertising. And it didn't happen until I started having mentors kind of come to me and say, you could really kill it in the space. Just keep going and I'll help you.
So with that, did school or family play a larger role in you becoming a designer, or were you kind of self-taught?
My parents actually were a big inspiration for me. They're both serial entrepreneurs and they actually work together, which is very rare for entrepreneurs. Not only do you have one entrepreneur in the family, but I had two. And not only did I have two, but they're my parents. And not only that, but they actually work together. They're actually partners. And they invent companies and spin them off and all that kind of exciting stuff. So the creativity really came as inspiration from them. School, I didn't really learn too much about being creative. I was an economics major and also did accounting and I took the once in a while kind of class that could have opened my eyes, but because my family was pretty diligent about what I was studying, I couldn't spend a lot of time like learning some of the classes that I wanted to really take. UCLA has a great design and media arts major and I was really interested in it, but I wasn't able to pursue it and I didn't really know too much about it. So it was probably my family, number one, just as an inspiration to take risks. And then number two, I actually started an organization, an entrepreneurship organization on campus. And when I started creating the ads and figuring out how to target the college students that we wanted to be part of the entrepreneurship organization, once I created the organization and wanted to figure out how to target them through media and writing on chalkboards and guerrilla marketing, writing on the sidewalk at UCLA and all that stuff, I realized I really had a knack for it. And so I actually straight up called Saatchi and Saatchi and left them a voice message saying, hey, I have no idea if I'm good for this like program that you have, like an internship program you have, but here's my info. I'm really excited about it. I just don't know too much about it. So would you be willing to just call me back?
So you just cold called an agency?
I just straight up cold called Saatchi and Saatchi. I have this personality where like I'm not super afraid of walking up to somebody or cold calling somebody, even if they're quote unquote unreachable or can't talk to them for some reason. Like I just have a drive in me to do that.
So with your cold calls to Saatchi and Saatchi, was that your first creative job or did you stumble into something else?
So it was actually my first creative role. I was an intern and I did it for about a summer. And at the time, their main client was Toyota. I was an account management intern. And 2 weeks into the role, I said, I'm bored. Can I switch to a different department? HR was somewhat open to the idea, but I just really kind of paved my way in. So I just kind of happened to meet some folks like in the strategy world as well as the creative side. They were on different floors. So at the time, account management was on the fourth floor and the creative teams were on the second floor and it was dimly lit. So the creatives could be quiet and do their magic. And so I was always like interested in that. So one day I just went down there. They were working really late at night. I was grinding on a project and I just happened to go down there on a Razor scooter that they had around the office. And I met who at the time was basically the head of creative, Andre Le Masurier. I asked him, I was like, hey, I'm about to get ordered dinner and some snacks. Do you all want anything? And he and some of the folks that he was managing and like were in the office grinding on a project were like, yeah, dude, I would actually love some corn nuts and not just any corn nuts, but I want like these barbecue corn nuts. So a fellow intern and myself, we went to like 3 or 4 different gas stations in the area to like find these damn corn nuts because I didn't really know who these people I was talking to at the time were and their position and stuff, but I just didn't like want to disappoint them. So we busted our asses to try to find these corn nuts and luckily I found them and he was like super impressed. He's like, are you serious? I was like kind of joking. So what happened there was, I mean, there's obviously a lesson of just like, it's not always bad to work late because other people that are working late with you, like they might be just willing to talk and like want to just like gab. You never know who you're going to talk to. So always take that leap and that initiative if you're down. But number two is I just like asked them, I was like, hey, what are y'all working on? And they said that they're working on a huge campaign for Camry. It's one of the biggest campaigns they've worked on. And they started telling me some of the issues that they've been having. And I said, I could help with that. Like, oh, you need to write some copy lines. You need me to research facts and give you the sources of those facts. I'm an economics major. Like I can totally do that. So eventually the creative team, like I started working with them on the second floor rather than on the fourth floor. I was still getting my account management work done, but they just like started advocating for me. And then at some point they actually advocated for me to extend my stay for another couple of weeks because they needed me on a project. So I'm really grateful for that kind of experience. on the flip side, the data analytics team was on the third floor, and that's where the kitchen was, and it was relatively loud and stuff like that. And I saw one Indian dude, and he was the only Indian dude that I saw in the building. And I walked up to him and I was like, "Hey, Indian, like you're Indian. Like, can we like talk about that? Like, you're the only person I've seen that's, kind of this company. Like, I would love to talk about that. Like, what is it like and stuff." And I think he was a little thrown off by like my energy. But he was really open. He was like, "Yeah, I mean, I'm on the data analytics team, and I am one of the only folks here, but it's like really creative and interesting." So that's where a light bulb went off, and I said, "Oh, I could be Brown. I could do account management and like deal with clients and like put together decks or whatever needed to be done. But I could also do strategy, and I could help out with data, and I could help with copywriting." And that's why I like started really falling in love with like that kind of intersection with all that stuff.
So it seems like a lot of like kismet moments happening, right? And it seems like between the fourth and the second floor, the third floor, like there's little moments of finding yourself. When did you consider yourself a creative?
I feel like I could consider myself a quote unquote creative once I had an official job where like creativity, I was doing something creative like 80% of the time. And what that essentially meant was I probably considered myself to be a creative or creative when I went to Wieden. That was my full-time role. I was very creative. I was able to be really creative at Saatchi and Saatchi. I was able to be very creative at Deutsch, but Wieden felt like I had made it. I went across country. I got the offer. I went across country within a couple of weeks, settled down in New York City. I was at fucking Wieden. And I was meeting all these amazing folks. And that's when I felt like I was a creative.
I mean, it seems like the ability to put yourself out there and be in the room and notice that sometimes being there late at night puts you in places where there's a comfortability factor. There's all of us camaraderie. We're all achieving the same goals. So we're no longer looking at each other as like, well, you work here and I work there and I do this, but also your ability to take the initiative to find those barbecue nuts where it's like, you're going to make sure that at least you're going to put in all the effort to try to find them, right? Maybe you don't, and that's okay. But the fact that you did probably also puts you on that extra level where people go, this person is going to go that extra mile for the project, for the team, for that. You're cold calling Saatchi and Saatchi. You're going across country to, Wieden+Kennedy. You're working with Sagmeister Walsh. You're working with Mother Design, right? You're presenting at brand new conference. Like, these are not small feats, right? What do you think has helped you get to that level? Because I think there's a level in there. We don't all get to do that. We get to do maybe one of those things. And it seems like you've been lucky enough and fortunate enough to kind of do a lot of those things.
So there's a lot of advice and insights I can kind of give related to that question. So one anecdote I'd like to share that kind of helps answer your question is that one time I was at a job interview for an agency. And at the end of the interview, I actually gave the interviewers a MTA card, a subway card. And the card had it had money on it. It had a one subway ride. I think at the time it was like $2.75. And like for a ride, plus the cost of like the card itself was like $1 or something like that at the time. So around $4 per card, which is expensive when it comes to like just giving out a gift, especially when you think about it as a business card. But I had my contact information stuck on there with like a sticker, kind of makeshift. And it had my contact information on it, of course, my name, my phone number, my email address, and some sort of tagline. So something along the lines of like, whenever you're in a pinch, use me. And so the idea was that when the interviewer ran out of subway rides on their card, they could remember, aha, Ritesh, like he's super useful. And they would be able to like use the card that I gave them whenever they're like in a pinch, because there's never a good time to run out of a swipe or money on a card, especially for the subway. And you see the F train going and leaving the train station. You're like, fuck, I should have put more money on it. So it was like those types of things that I started doing with people or for people that started setting me apart. Now, I do want to be clear, I did not get that job. I actually was not right for it at all. And they told me straight up, like, come back when you have something different. And I'm actually fortunate that I did not get that job, because I would not have been happy. But the point being is that I'm now in contact with the folks that I gave those cards to, and they remember that. So that's one example. When it comes from making the jump to Wieden, to working with Sagmesh and Walsh and Mother, there were a couple of experiences between them that I want to kind of highlight. I'm a huge Shark Tank fan. And so when I saw two ideas, Hungry Harvest and Pet Plate, on Shark Tank, the following day, I just straight up cold emailed them. The cool thing about that is that, yes, they're getting a lot of buzz but there's a surprisingly little number of people that actually hit them up and say, hey, I want to work for you. And not only that, but hey, your website sucks and I want to help you redesign it. And not only am I going to get your website to like look better and feel better, but I can guarantee you it's going to turn into sales. And so that's when I realized that I could really pitch in cold emails and like just one line, like, hey, I saw you on Shark Tank, really love the concept. By the way, your website's like is really not up to snuff. And I always ask a question at the end, like a yes or no question. Like, do you want to hop on the phone tomorrow? So it's like very easy, yes or no. And so I did that twice and I got both the gigs. To a degree that actually I almost made up a job for myself, in the sense of they were looking at the time for specific things, but I was like, no, I'll do that stuff, but I want to add more on top of that. So the learning there is, especially with startups, I always encourage people of color to not just look at what the job description is, but to morph it in a way that really suits you. Yeah, of course, you might do the stuff that's like on the paper, but eventually you can start like adding things to it. And one of those things for Pet Plate was leading a rebrand. And luckily, we had a lot of investors that were very down for very creative work. And Sagmesh and Walsh was a perfect fit for the company at the time. Realm did something similar where they were technically hiring a UI or UX designer, but I said, no. I'm much more better suited for in a product role. And of course I'll do the UI, and of course I'll help with the UX and stuff, but I want to be at a slightly different level. And I'm also going to help you lead your rebrand, because I'm not feeling the brand right now and I would love to redo that. And I was very clear during the interview process that how much budget do you have for a rebrand? What kind of work are you inspired by? Like, how cool can we take this? So that way, before I even like accepted the job offer or continued, I wasn't wasting anybody's time, and I knew exactly what kind of work Molly, for example, the founder at Realm, formerly Cereal Box, really wanted.
So is that really you coming down to do enough research of these brands to understand not only what the brief is and the fact that their stuff just doesn't look up to snuff and they need to take it up a notch, but how you're able to, one, decide, yeah, there's all these lists of things that you think you need, but also I understand that there's a whole another level of things that I'm also willing to do to get you to the point where you need to be. That doesn't seem like something that is, obviously it's not job description wise. It's in the realm of going above and beyond, but it's also in the realm of understanding, how sometimes clients don't really know what they need. They just think they need an updated photo or just a logo, or one little component is going to make the whole thing feel fresh. And designers come to the table and go, well, yes, that would enhance it for a week. But if you're looking to make money, to change the game, to do any of this, you need to do a brand audit and really consider, right? It looks like you're bringing this insight to them where they really had nobody doing that work for them. And as a designer who's wants to get the business, you're doing so much more than just design. It seems like you're almost, I had one guest who basically said, I'm making it easy for you to say yes. I'm doing all the work that you should have been doing, and all you have to do is say yes, and we can make this thing happen. Is that like, how do you get to that point? Because that doesn't seem like those things don't fall in your lap. You're making it sound very simple in the way that these things happen. I love the little snippet of the ability to ask a question at the end of an email, right? It gives them something to do, so they're gonna have to respond to you. It's an easy way out, or it's a connection in. But it seems like there is this ability for you to foresee what people don't see in themselves and start to look at those things and offer suggestions in a way that connects you to people, right? Like the way that you're looking at the MTA swipe pass is like, if you're in a pinch, I can help. That like marketing speak of this Metro card is allowing you to reach out to me, or I'm helping you. It's a great way for people to use that. And so I'm seeing this ability to get from point A to point B, but how did you learn a little bit just to go back to research like that? That doesn't come naturally.
So I would say it comes somewhat naturally, but it's mostly a learned behavior. I would say that typically most designers, when you're talking about creating a new app or a new world, or a new startup, whatever you might be designing, including legislation or something, typically those folks are relatively separate from a data focused individual. It's relatively rare to have a designer who can speak or is even interested about speaking both design and data. And what's interesting is that we have a decent amount of research that shows that the better the design, the better your stock price or better your performance will be, bottom line. McKinsey ran a very large study about this and has proven that out. I spoke a little bit about this at Brand New, and I encouraged everybody who was watching to just take a screenshot of the slide that I showed and use it during new business pitches. Because the more we can demonstrate to the whole world that there is an ultimate benefit monetarily, in addition to social, et cetera, we're all going to be better off for it. So why keep that deck slide to myself? Now, I have been fortunate enough to work with folks that already know the value of design, and they know the value of branding. They know the value of like a really great fluid user experience, just because it's the right thing to do. And a lot of the founders that I've worked with and the folks that I've collaborated with, they understand how frustrating it is to have a poor user experience, like an onboarding flow that's asking too many questions, or a site that's loading longer than 3 seconds, any of that stuff. So they do know the value of design intrinsically, but to be able to go to a team, especially folks that control where the budget goes, to be able to say, I did an A/B test and it increased conversions, like signups on a checkout page, by 10%. And that means at our current rate that it's going to equal another $333,000. That's a really powerful and really exciting thing that a designer is able to say. So they don't have to just rely on some of the stuff that's typically design is typically known for, related to beauty or fluidity. But now we're able to also talk about it from a monetary point of view for the people who need to hear about the monetary point of view. But being able to combine both those things have allowed a lot of the companies that I've been fortunate to work with and seen just around the world absolutely kill it and absolutely crush it.
Right. And I mean, there's definitely an intrinsic value to why design is important, right? And when you come down to the X and the O's and in the red or in the black, right? Like where if design is going to make you money, yes, please. Somebody who's looking at that, and sometimes that's the language I need to hear. You can put all the bells and whistles. This is going to look amazing. Look at this beautiful color. It's going to function. This button is going to be the best button ever. But it's like, how much money is it going to make? Okay, cool. Now I'm down, right? It definitely seems like your ability to navigate between the fourth and the second floor, where that accounting was in the third, you've added to your design experience with these exponential experiences. The ability to go a little bit further for that design team, to connect with that other Indian person on the third floor, to learn about, well, data is important. There's all of these things that kind of are just working together. And it's funny because it seems like there's a lot of similarities from what you've been doing with larger, well-known agencies and some of these small startups. Can you give me one big similarity or difference that you see working from a startup or working for a large company?
So the main similarity that I see, especially with the places that I've been able to collaborate with, like Sagmesh Walsh and Mother Design and some of these other folks, contrary to historical relationships, the incentives have really been aligned. We're not trying to make work just for an award. The similarity of between these agencies as well as the startups of both being like emotionally vested in the success of a company is something that has huge interest to me. And that's one of the reasons why I really love working at mission driven startups and consulting for mission driven companies and things like that, even as little as type consulting, because of that kind of symbiosis, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Traditionally, the incentives have been very misaligned. An external partner might just be interested in creating like really creative work. The startup is really trying to raise money and doing whatever they can to like show really positive investor metrics. But now those two worlds are evaporating and they're becoming like one. So that's a similarity that I've seen, but in the past it's been very different.
And you started touching on what we're going to shift into, right? Mission driven. And it might have been probably 2 years ago in 2020, in the lovely June, when I think I first just learned about you because of the Where Are All the Black Designers conference that happened, right? The virtual conference that was just that awakening that everybody needed to come back to, dealing with originally Cheryl Miller's stuff, and then Maurice Cherry's stuff, and then Mitzi and Garrett. So this ongoing unfortunate thing that where are the diversity in an industry that's been going on for this long? How did you get introduced to Mitzi and Garrett and to become a volunteer as part of that movement?
So when the conference was happening, the first conference that is, I tried my best to offer interesting or additive information in the chat. The chat was blowing up.
Oh, it was crazy.
That's not even including when Roxane Gay showed up as the special guest. I'm talking about before that. People were going crazy. And it was both Black folk and non-Black folk. And because I'd done a little bit of research in this space, taking AIGA and Google design census and presenting that, and I had some slides, I was able to pull a little bit on that. So as interesting discussions were happening from the panelists and the moderators, I was able to drop in some of that stuff into the chat, and people seem to enjoy it. And I realized that evening after the conference had wrapped up that there was this pent up kind of need for the community to do more, needed moderation. Mitzi and Garrett needed some support. They wanted some support. And so I reached out and ended up becoming a volunteer, mostly because I wanted to help and I didn't want my assistance to be some sort of one-day conference and then ghost type of thing, as actually has happened with a lot of non-Black folk. And so I knew that the organization had a lot of staying power, and the other volunteers really welcomed me with open arms. And I'm proud to say that we had our second conference last year and it went off great. We had even deeper discussions that some of the discussions that we wanted to touch on more from the previous one. And we had some really amazing panelists. I was fortunate enough to moderate an ally focused panel discussion, which we felt was important for allies to hear while still centering Black folk. That was actually a very difficult conversation because the way where the conversation went from one of the panelists, it became a little difficult. So luckily I was seeing in the chat that people were respectful of how I was approaching the topics that came up. And that re-energized my interest in helping. And I realized that I'm relatively good at helping somebody, even in a public space, somebody that might be vulnerable and thinking on my feet. And that's when I realized, wow, I really want to, I just really want to keep going with this. And I wasn't even doubting that I would stop being a volunteer or anything like that before the second conference. This just got me even more fired up. So we have a lot of really exciting news coming out, hopefully in the next few months, about the future of Wear the Black designers.
Mm-hmm. And I just, as a viewer of that particular panel, I definitely can understand how to navigate sensitive topics and be respectful to all the people involved, and also stand your ground, right? And make sure that you're not gonna kind of acquiesce to anybody who's been doing it for a long time and just be like, well, that's the way it is. You're challenging respectfully and also trying to teach and hopefully get through. And sometimes in a moment, it's not something that is you're able to take in. Hopefully that individual was able to like think back and be like, oh, I understand. And that's all we can do, right? Is to kind of like just bring it up, because if we don't bring it up, then it systematically just continues to happen. So I definitely think your ability to think on your feet, but also feel that support that was happening in the chat, to be like, you're going the right direction, where you're not trying to call the person out, you're trying to support, but also forcefully enough to be like, this is kind of a big deal. We need to address this situation, right? And so anybody who was listening to the conference probably knows, so we don't need to go into it, but that was just definitely something that kind of sparked my interest too, because I think that's a very hard thing to do. It's easy to get frustrated and maybe take it to a place where it doesn't need to be, especially in a public forum. And I think that was just another interesting thing, and the fact that it re-energized you to kind of be like, the work still needs to be done, and what I'm doing is helping support this larger mission. As I kept on doing research for you to kind of like dig into some questions, like we mentioned before, I always want to, ask my guests things that are not necessarily the same things you're going to get. I don't want to ask you the same question that this other article asked you, but I think I read I think it was your Dieline article feature, where it says that you mention that you mentor other designers, which I think is awesome, but really that you focus on Typefaces by BIPOC creatives. So here's a two-part question, sort of. How important is that to you? And then beyond the big names of like Joshua Darden and Trey Seals, how do you find these typefaces that are by BIPOC designers? Because for myself, I've looked and like searching just kind of like rudimentary Google searches of like Black designers, typefaces, or Latin design, it's not easy to find.
So finding and utilizing typefaces from folks that are traditionally underrepresented is really important to me, because as we do that and focus on it more and more, we are literally giving more visibility to folks that traditionally aren't being seen, because literally these typefaces are being read by millions and billions of eyeballs every day. And there are phenomenal typefaces that have been done from people who are of color or other identities that deserves to be seen. At the very least, going to those foundries or looking at the work from specific designers, considering those first, and then going the more common routes. And at least giving them at least the first, what I would say in, I guess, real estate terms, a term I just learned today, right of first refusal type of thing. Like give the traditionally marginalized and underrepresented type designers the first stab, like the first chance. And what that requires is putting the onus on the person who's selecting the typeface. It takes a lot of work to do that. There are amazing resources that Letterform Archive, for example, has, that was actually started by the question of, where are all the Black type designers from Bobby Martin? And there's now a really beautiful resource of Black type foundry owners as well as Black type designers. Trey Seals from Vocal Type is obviously on there. Joshua Darden, one of the first Black type designers in America, one of the most renowned folks, he's obviously on there. And there's a ton of other incredible folks. When it comes to typefaces from women or typefaces from East Asian women specifically, or something like that, there are also resources out there. Typographica has done some really great work in interviewing Native American designers, specifically who are interested in type. And those are other great resources. So the onus is really on spending the extra, I would say, double the time that you think would consider finding a typeface. If it takes you traditionally 10 or 20 hours to find a typeface, consider around 40 hours to go that extra length to find the fonts that feel good and feel right for the project. And I'm not saying you have to use a quote unquote diverse type just for the sake of it and don't care about how it looks and don't care about any of that. Like all of the story around who created it, the sense of craft, the aesthetic, and the feel, and how well it jives with the rest of the branding, all that stuff has to be taken into account. So I would start with the identity of the designer first, and then move on to the more literally aesthetic decisions and go from there. So that's one thing that I would love to do. And the onus also is on the client. If there's a client that they're a type designer might be working with, or typographer is working with, it's also up to them to say, talk to me about the fonts, like teach me a little bit about typography. Because, and I talked about this during Type Directors Club, when a layperson types in cool fonts or beautiful fonts or something like that, there's very poor resources out there that show up on the first couple of pages of Google search results. So the layperson traditionally doesn't know about East Asian, like specifically Filipina based fonts or something like that. The average person is not going to know that. So it's often up to the designer and the client to work together and educate each other about the story of the fonts that they chose, who's doing it, what's their identity, why this typeface outside of the aesthetic decisions. Now, most lay people aren't going to know the story. Like most people aren't going to know Joshua Darden did Halyard or Joshua Darden did another typeface, but it's really, really important for the industry to at least come to reckoning with how we're choosing fonts and how we're choosing and selecting the visibility that we give.
I agree. I think that type is such a language that designers own, that the ability to control that and the aesthetic of that is one of the things that we're able to make sure makes or breaks something. You know, when we talk about maybe the ability to be in the room or something, type choices is where we get to shine, and how a page looks. Those are the decisions that we tend to make that make or break things. And if we can include type designs and illustrations and things from people from these marginalized groups, but it's not even to only include them, it's to really include the nuance that these typefaces and these designs bring, because the little idiosyncrasies that they bring is cultural that makes or breaks sometimes the work that you add them to. Like when you think of a Trey Seals design and vocal type, I mean, I think I just bought the book, the Spike Lee book, and he designed the typeface throughout the whole entire book that's based on, you know, Radio Raheem's Four Finger Rings, right? Love and Hate. And to think that that four finger ring, which is in the 80s, and any jeweler would have created that typeface, and nobody would consider a jeweler a typeface designer, right? Traditionally. But now Trey is making a whole entire foundry and type family off of this one aesthetic and making it beautiful, and also doing it for people like us who grew up with Spike Lee and Do the Right Thing. The movie is kind of just in our wheelhouse of like, that is representation and the conflict and the day and a hot summer day, right? Like all of those things matter. So when you look at that typeface, there's so much weight behind that versus just selecting Times New Roman. Doesn't mean it doesn't have its place, but I think there's so much history and stories with other typefaces from designers that are there, that it elevates and works with you, you know, with the projects you put them on.
And something I also want to add, I want to give a couple of different nods to some folks that I think are doing some interesting work. Future Fonts is a place where I found a lot of traditionally unreleased fonts that aren't on Adobe Typekit or somewhere else. I found a lot of the future fonts, by the way, the URL is futurefonts.xyz. I go to there oftentimes, and you could find the people of color that are on there, and you could see a lot of fonts that are in development and they're not even perfect and they're not finished yet. And some of those fonts are going to take years to get done. If not, they might not ever be finished, but they'll allow you to test them and use them in different ways. And I love utilizing that. And then Juan Villanueva who was actually on the panel that I moderated, he's doing a lot of great stuff within the BIPOC type design community, and he's got a really great fund that he's raised, and he's worked with incredible up and coming folks who traditionally wouldn't go to the Coopers of the world or another type spot. The other one that I've been really loving is Sharp Type, and they have a scholarship, and the Malley Scholarship, and some of the typefaces that are coming out of the finalists and the winners of that scholarship are absolutely incredible. And they're all people of color and women specifically. And I really appreciate that approach to sponsoring folks to release fonts that deserve to be released. And I think it's doing a great job of centering women and also specifically people of color, women who are people of color and who are also not identifying along the binary, and they're non-binary, et cetera. So I'm really loving some of the platforms that deserve to be more recognized.
Thanks for listening to the first part of this 2-part episode. My convo with Ritesh ran a bit longer than usual, and I really didn't want to cut much of it. Please look out for the continued part 2 to be released in a couple of weeks. And for any mentions and websites from the episode, take a look at the show notes or visit us at our website, wip.show. Thanks for listening. See you next time.